Welcome to Fading Causes. My name is Mukesh Kapila, and my guest today is a former soldier. Major General James Cowan has seen action with the British Army in numerous places, notably in Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and he's also overseen the security of the London Olympics, which I guess was one of his probably one of his greatest challenges. He's now the CEO of the Halo Trust, the world's largest humanitarian mine clearance organization. More on that later, but in welcoming you, James, let me start with what we have in common. Curiously, we went to the same school, Wellington College, in southern England. This was founded in 1853 as a national living monument to educate the sons of heroes, not the daughters. That was not to come for over a century later. In gratitude to that iconoclastic soldier, the Duke of Wellington, known as the Iron Duke, who won the Battle of Waterloo to crush Napoleon's ambition to rule Europe. And as you will recall, our school's motto is Fortune favors the bold. Has that worked for you, James?
Well, thank you, Mukesh, for that very kind introduction. It's a terrible thing in the 21st century. We shouldn't be talking about the old boy network of private schools. I feel terrible that we're even mentioning this, but yeah, I mean, I think fortune has favoured me. I'm always reminded of a hero of mine, Field Marshal Bill Slim, said, "If you're ever presented with two courses of action of equal merit, always choose the bolder one." And I think that's true, and I think I am a person inclined towards being bold. But I think you should be thinking about risk in an informed way and not just taking gambles. I think I like to think through a problem. I like to weigh up the merits of something, and it might be bold, but I like to think that I don't stumble into stuff without first thinking it through.
I think your risk assessment strategy must have been useful to you because you've served in many troubled regions. For example, in Afghanistan, you were a brigade commander in Helmand, and I've been to Helmand myself. And it's one of the worst places I've ever been to in my life. And you made a stirring address to your troops. I saw it on YouTube. And you said that you were not there to crush the Taliban, but to win the people. Now, we know what's happened since then. Any thoughts on how winning the hearts of the people of Afghanistan went? What lessons can we learn from the Western engagement in Afghanistan?
Well, it slightly fills me with trepidation that you say it's one of the worst places you've ever been to. I'm actually going there in a couple of weeks' time with Halo, and I go back to Afghanistan pretty regularly. Actually, the last time I went to Helmand, I stopped off in Kandahar and saw the governor there, who was very kind to receive me. But he kept me waiting for about 40 minutes in the heat. This was 2 years ago, and my team, my Afghans, began to look a bit sort of worried about what was happening. And eventually, he ushered us into his palace and into the cool of his office. Um, and the meeting got off to a slightly frosty start because he revealed that he also had watched that very same video on YouTube. So anyway, we made friends, and in that very Afghan way, he invited me to stay for dinner and to stay the night, and that's what I particularly like about the Pashtun and Afghans in general is that code of Pashtunwali, the hospitality. And I think what I draw from all of this is that, yes, wars happen, but ultimately peace is what matters. And humans are united by their common humanity. And my organization is now working across Afghanistan and working in Helmand in particular. And I think for many British soldiers who fought there, they probably do question what was it all for. But I find some redemptive quality in going back there because, we are saving life. We are making communities better. I remember visiting a village in Marja. The population had left there in 2010, which is actually when I was the brigade commander, and they hadn't been back for 14 years. They didn't know where any of the IDs were, and they were taking all sorts of casualties, children being injured, and they were desperate for us to help. And it gave me a great sense of pleasure to come to that community that were in such desperate straits and to be able to offer assistance. And we're absolutely determined to stay with Afghanistan and help them come to a future where there are no more landmines or bombs or IEDs or anything else that may harm people.
I'm sort of curious to hear you use the word redemption in relation to the ups and downs of our engagement in Afghanistan, not just the past few years, but centuries, even perhaps, as anyone who knows history will recognize. Would you apply that word also in relation to Iraq, where you were also involved? And where, as you know, as someone has said, the path to heaven or hell is paved with good intentions. You've talked a lot about a holistic approach to crisis management, and you've been in many crises, and you've tried to connect in your work the dimensions of defense, diplomacy, and development. And now you're doing that in Halo Trust. Sounds great in principle, but why do we fail so often in practice? And should we not learn the lesson that we should stop interfering in the affairs of others, especially as we seem to make such a mess time after time?
Well, I'm going to come up with a slightly countercultural view on all of this. The low point of death in conflict in the post-war era was 2005, i.e., the year after my first period of service in Iraq. That is the year 2005, probably, that coincides with the absolute low point of the American operation there. It was a period of high criticism of people like Tony Blair and George Bush. But it is actually the moment when there were the fewest number of people killed in conflict in human history. And that's a pretty extraordinary fact. And since that time, that era of interventionism that really was marked from 9/11 through to the withdrawal from Iraq, we've had a period of isolationism. And I would argue that actually, when you add up the number of people, let's say, killed in a country like Syria, the consequences of not fulfilling our duties on the world stage are far more severe than what took place in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'd actually urge the West to rediscover its mojo, its sense of confidence in itself. And I believe, and you've already mentioned this, that I look at the world through the lens of defense, diplomacy, and development together in an integrated way. And I think there's too many people who want to separate them out. And I think the Western nations can be a force for good in the world and can achieve better things. And part of our problem today is that we actually look weaker and don't exercise the power inherent to the size of our economy. So I think there's a different argument to be made. And what I think is going on at the moment in the world is that the West is having to rediscover its mojo a bit and play its part. Because if it doesn't play its part, then bad things happen.
Well, I can't resist taking this opportunity to ask you about the mojo and its application in Ukraine. Where do you think we're heading there? And how can we get our mojo kind of more proactively deployed?
I think that the extraordinary thing about the Ukraine war is that the illegal invasion of one country by another, which should, by all reasonable calculations, have ended within the first week, did not. And that much more significant military power, Russia, failed to defeat a much smaller power. And after those first few days of wondering what might happen, it was quite obvious that Russia's invasion had stalled. And what has followed over the subsequent months and years is a grinding battle of attrition in which Ukraine has gallantly defended itself and shown the world that Russia cannot easily conquer Ukraine. Russia makes a few miles every year, but these are tiny distances. Compare and contrast, let us say, how far the Soviet Union advanced between Stalingrad and the fall of Berlin over what period. From really 1942 to 1945, the Soviet Union went all the way from nearly the Urals to Berlin. How far has Russia gone in 3 years? A few miles. And so Ukraine has put up this extraordinary defense. If it is properly supported, it could continue to put up that defense. But not losing is not the same thing as winning. And I think that neither side can easily win this war. It is appalling the scale of death and mayhem inflicted on the young men, mostly young men of both those countries. It's very hard to come by accurate figures, but probably somewhere around 900,000 Russians and 400,000 Ukrainians are casualties, either dead or wounded. And that's a terrible thing. And so at some point, the war has to end, and the West has to use its power to engineer negotiations. And that's what I very much hope happens at some point. But the war needs to end with honor. I believe if the right diplomacy is applied, it is possible to achieve that.
Well, ending a war with honor, and we're on the same page on that one, involves making compromises. Can compromises be made with honor?
Yes, I believe they can. I mean, you began by describing my career. I started as a private soldier. I've gone from the very bottom of the army, and I joined the army British Army in 1982 in Northern Ireland, and it looked in 1982, which was the height of the hunger strikes, of some really terrible things happening in Ireland, and it looked as if the troubles were set to endure forever. There could be no end to them. Of course, there was an end, and it was a compromise. It was a negotiation. The Good Friday Agreement involved both sides recognizing that there was more to be got from talking than from fighting. And so the troubles came to an end. And yes, there's nothing wrong with compromise. It is actually what has to happen in most things in life.
To state the obvious, I think the nature of war has obviously changed, and the laws of war are treated as a sick joke. The question is whether soldiering is still kind of generally honorable profession, or is it now just a perverted pursuit? And can we redeem the force for good that you yourself have talked about so passionately in the past?
Well, if you were to wind the clock back a century, traditionally in this country, in your country, my country, Britain, the professions were the church, the navy, the army, and the law. And there is something honourable about belonging to a profession. But I think what marks, let's say, medicine out from the military. My wife's a doctor, and there is a common humanity to medicine, the Hippocratic Oath. You could turn to a doctor in any country. I mean, of course, there are exceptions. Dr. Harold Shipman in Britain or Dr. Mengele in Germany. Bad men who do bad things. But generally speaking, medicine is marked by a common professional belief in saving life and making people well. I don't think that's true of the military. I don't think you can really generalize about armies. They come in all shapes and sizes, and armies are famously subject to political control. And if that political control is malign, as it was in Nazi Germany or under Pol Pot, then those military people will also be malign. Or if there is a lack of political control in some countries, such as Sudan at the moment, militaries run riot because of the absence of the rule of law. So I think to talk in terms of all militaries being the same it isn't really the case in the way that humans function. I believe passionately in nation states but working under the rule of law, both within their own internal laws, but also to a rules-based international system. I would challenge you about that rules-based system being more under threat today than at any point in human history. My instinct is actually that what happened in 1945 was a victor's justice, and the rules-based system that followed it was very much what the United States and her allies wanted. And it actually lasted for a relatively short period of time. Some might even argue it didn't really happen then either. It only really came to being from 1989 when the bipolar world gave way to a single superpower. But if you look back through the course of human history, actually the sad reality is that conflict is a more natural state of affairs. I mean, let's take, for instance, the 18th century. I mean, the long 18th century, the Great Northern War, the War of the Spanish Succession, the War of the Austrian Succession, the 7 Years' War, the American War of Independence, the French Revolutionary Wars, the Napoleonic Wars. The world is more at war than it's not. And we still haven't gone back to that condition. We're in a much more optimistic place, and we don't yet need to believe that the world has completely gone to the dogs. There is much to hope for if we do the right thing. And I continue to believe that militaries, if properly subject to political control within a democratic system, within the rule of law, can be forces for good in the world. And I would argue that our sort of loss of confidence in the aftermath of Iraq and Afghanistan has actually been detrimental to world order. And that is why we're probably now rearming. But I also believe that it isn't just about the lethal instruments inherent within navies, armies, and air forces. I think one of the great sadnesses of the last few weeks in Britain is that we've transferred money out of overseas aid into defence. I think that was a terrible mistake. I think the value of soft power, the value of adding something to this world really matters. And let's take Afghanistan. We spent $2.5 trillion, we being the West, on Afghanistan. Then we walked away from it. Now we're ignoring it. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be engaging. We may not be happy with the Taliban regime. We may not like what they're doing with women and girls. But the only people we're harming now are the people of Afghanistan. And if we do that, then Afghanistan will become a much more volatile and dangerous place. So we have unending responsibilities in this world. There is no end game. There is no exit strategy from being a major power. And the sooner we remember that fact and go back to an unending commitment to our place in the world, the better.
Now, from fighting in well-intentioned wars, you moved on to picking up the debris, and you are the CEO of the Halo Trust. I've seen a lot of work of the Halo Trust when I was funding that in my role as a donor in the UK government. I've seen your work in Afghanistan, Kosovo, and in Angola, where you will recall Princess Diana walking through a live minefield wearing a Halo Trust flak jacket. Let us start perhaps by you explaining a little bit to our listeners something more basic. What are landmines? What is unexploded ordnance? How big is the problem worldwide? And something of the background.
Yeah, well, I mean, Halo is it's been around since 1988. It was founded by a kind of maverick character called Colin Mitchell, known to the world's media as Mad Mitch. And he had been a young man. I think he'd only been 19 or something when he'd been a young subaltern in the war in northern Italy. And many of his friends and comrades were killed and wounded by landmines. And then he served in Korea and saw similar things at a later point. And then it was as a result of that experience and the fact he served later in Yemen that he founded Halo. And what is it about landmines that marks them out? Well, war is an act of human cruelty, but it is, I'm afraid to say, in many cases, a rational act of cruelty. It's done deliberately to achieve state objectives. And most weapons kill in the moment and they kill the intended victim. But landmines are a defensive weapon and they are hermetically sealed explosive devices. They are dumb munitions in the main and they explode when someone stands on them. And because they are hermetically sealed and sit in the ground, they are impervious to water ingress and they can remain active, not years, but actually decades after the time at which they were laid to cause effect on the enemy. So it isn't the enemy, whoever they might be, who are harmed. It's actually completely innocent civilians. It's children going to school. It's farmers trying to till their fields. It's travellers going along a road. And that is an unacceptable, immoral state of affairs. And because landmines are cheap to make, they are the eternal sentry. They never sleep. They never take the weekend off. They are laid in their tens of millions around the world. And there are, I'm afraid to say, all too many landmines still present. So that is the purpose of my charity, is to clear up those landmines. And we have cleared 2 million landmines. Only a couple of years ago, we reached the 2 million mark. There's a great sense of pride for my people who go out to work every day, 12,000 of them, and they put their personal lives at risk to do this work. And they're extremely courageous, and they're doing it to save life and restore livelihoods. And in so doing, that's 2 million people who haven't been killed or wounded by a landmine. And we intend to carry on doing this for as long as is necessary.
Well, Halo deminers are truly admirable considering the risks they take. And can't imagine bigger example of, if you like, personal courage and humanitarian courage. But I'm getting dismayed hearing that some countries are now thinking of walking away from the 1997 Ottawa Convention that banned anti-personnel landmines. Respectable countries like Finland, for example, I know they're on the front line with Russia, but walking away from the Ottawa Convention. Is it another backward step, or is this understandable now that we're going back to landmines, considering the changing threats of war?
Halo is, above all else, a pragmatic organization. We are a doing, not a saying charity. Our role is to go and clear up landmines, and we were never part of the campaigning bit of the movement. And there is a place for campaigning, but it just doesn't happen to be what Halo does. The irony of the landmine ban treaty is that the principal donor to it, the United States of America, was never a signatory to the treaty. And for all those European countries that did sign the treaty and provide money for it, the irony is that their capacity to do that came from the Article 5 NATO commitment of the United States to protect Europe. And so the need now for European countries to step up and increase their defense spending and to defend their own sovereign territory, in a sense, it explains why it is some of them believe they need to use landmines. Now, my view is that the treaty is a really outstanding piece of work, that it has succeeded beyond most perhaps arms control treaties in other categories of weaponry, and we should seek to defend it. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how can we best keep it relevant in the 21st century? Now, as a person who's only been in the humanitarian sector for 10 years, the one thing I've really noticed is just how much nostalgia there is around the 1990s and, that Lady Di moment. And I'm not a nostalgist. I think we should think about the future. How do we keep the treaty relevant? How do we keep countries contributing? Before Finland joined the treaty, by the way, it was a late signatory to the treaty, it was persuaded to give money to landmine clearance. So even though it's left the treaty now, I think hopefully we can persuade it to go back to clearing up after landmines. So I'm a pragmatist. I want to keep the treaty, but I want to make sure as many countries as possible feel they can stay within it. And we need to think through how perhaps it needs modernizing.
James, thank you very much for allowing me a glimpse into yourself and to share a little of the journey you have traveled. I hope that gives some thought for reflection to our listeners, and I hope the debate will be rejoined in many different ways as we reflect on the complex narrative that I think your story has revealed about war and peace in our world.
Oh, you're so lovely to say all those things, Mukesh. Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.